You've led the negotiations on the UN Pact for the Future, which was adopted last September at the General Assembly, which was a really important milestone. The pact lays out 56 actions to strengthen global cooperation and tackle many of our big challenges. Now you're heading up the initiative of UN80, which is essentially a deep dive into how the UN may be more effective, impactful as it approaches its 80th anniversary. So how are you connecting the dots between the Pact's ambitions and now this new push for reform and the streamlining of the UN system?
Great. Well, thank you, Shea. It's great to be with you, have this conversation. I think you're right. The pact that we adopted last September, I think it's universally seen as a real achievement by the multilateral system. In already difficult conditions, lots of divisions in the multilateral space, our member states came together and adopted basically a blueprint for the future across, frankly, the whole range of UN activities, from peace and security, human rights, development, and also taking in some of the forward-looking and emerging issues like how to manage digital technologies, how to adjust our work to the interests of future generations. So it's a big win. I also want to say that whilst we give a lot of attention, and rightly so, to the Pact, there are other things happening in the UN system just this year. Just think what we've achieved. We've got a pandemic treaty out of the World Health Organization. We got a great oceans conference in Nice earlier in the year. We just concluded a really important financing for development conference in Spain, in Sevilla. So, the system keeps on producing. It's not just a one-off thing. And so when we move to think about UN80, which I think you very correctly characterized as an attempt to reform the system, to make it more impactful, to make it more efficient, cost-effective, at a time when we really should be doing those things, this is not an alternative or new agenda. It's the how we deliver on all of these things. So you say, connect the dots between UN80 and the Pact, for example. I think one is about the substance, the what we need to be doing. I think UN80 is very much about how we go about doing it, improving our working methods, our efficiencies, and making sure that we're really on key for the times that we're living in and the challenges which are emerging. So they fit together very neatly.
Great. You really have some challenges ahead of you and an awful lot of work, but you described that there were three key areas of the UN80 initiative: improving efficiencies, effectiveness, mandate implementation, which, if I understand correctly, you mentioned some 40,000 mandates over the 80 years, and structural changes with program alignment. As an optimist, which I know you are, what outcomes would you like to see out of this exercise?
Yeah, we have to be optimists, right? But you, again, set out these three work streams. If you put them together, what would the UN look like, a couple of years down the line? Well, the efficiencies agenda, I think, speaks for itself. We are in a situation of resource constraints, whether we like it or not, accompanied by great uncertainties. It's one of our great difficulties in life. But it, I think, is absolutely necessary and normal on the 80th anniversary of any organization to take a look at ourselves. Are we duplicating processes? Are we doing things efficiently as we should? And that's what our efficiency agenda is all about. I think we'll be announcing fairly soon some measures which would basically be simplification of processes, would also be relocating staff from higher cost locations. We're sitting in one higher cost location, the lower cost locations. So this will make, I think, the organization, to coin a phrase, leaner and fitter, always with a view to the impact that we have. Now, you've mentioned this, somewhat obscure idea of mandate review. People don't really understand easily what a mandate review means. It means taking a look at all of the resolutions, all of the decisions, all of the statements that have been adopted, as you said, over 8 decades. And they have amounted to 40,000 over 80 years. We need to take a look at them to see where they overlap, to see where they are redundant, and then to see if the system is set up to implement them. There are 140 entities in the UN system. It's an archipelago of entities with very fragmented governance systems. We have to see if we are working coherently together to deliver on these mandates in the most efficient and most impactful way, which takes us to that third piece, which is the structural review. 140 entities. Do we need 140? Do they fit together properly? Is our work divided out logically between them? We need to step back and take a look at the big picture. We know that structures, when they're in place, are very difficult to change, but we have to make that effort. So if you put all that together, I think you can get a vision of a UN which is working as one, working together, working efficiently, and also working, I think, to a very clear common purpose expressed in mandates that everybody understands and everybody supports. So that's what it might look like.
That's great, because we're hearing an awful lot about this is a budget exercise, but this is much more than a budget exercise. This is truly a deep dive into a really complex system, but so critical.
Yeah, let me pick you up on that, Shea, because it's a really important point. Part of our efficiencies agenda, it's already announced, is that the Secretary General wants to reduce the budget for the UN Secretariat here in New York by about 15 to 20% and reduce posts by about 20%. This is a big effort, and it looks like downsizing, just looked at in isolation, but it isn't just a downsizing operation. It is a strategic operation to invest where we need to invest, yes, to deprioritize in areas where we simply can't cover the whole waterfront, and to make us come out of all of this stronger. And I think I should emphasize that the UN80 initiative is not a response to any one member state. And it's not simply a response to our financial difficulties. We have a liquidity crisis at the UN, which is simply due to the fact that a number of member states do not meet their financial contributions to the organization, not in full, not on time, or not at all, and that inevitably, whatever we do in UN80, will leave us in financial difficulties.
Right. So coming on to the private sector, at the ILO, thanks to the tripartite structure, as you know very well, employers are at the table. But at the UN, and what I've seen over the last 5 years in New York, it's harder for the private sector to get a seat at the table and even be heard. And we're not talking about these small little 2-minute speeches here and there, but we really want to play a role in assisting you in all of this. Yet, when I go into the UN and I listen over the last few weeks, business and private sector, it's in every conversation. And if we want to reach the 2030 agenda, we know we're a really important party to this. Do you think there's room for structural or governance changes to the UN to be more inclusive and to eventually see really the private sector as a partner with the UN?
Yeah, let's put the special case of the ILO to one side, and we both value that tripartite engagement of employers and workers alongside governments in the work of that agency. But that's not how the UN as a whole works. We do have a global compact, which has been intentionally designed as an interface with the business community. But I agree with you that there's a sort of a paradox here. Every conversation that I hear in whatever area we're talking about, development, finance, environment, business is mentioned almost in every speech, in every breath. So I think there is very broad recognition, I want to say unanimous recognition, that we need to engage the private sector in the work that we do. And I agree with you again, Shea. That means more than 5 minutes with a microphone turned on in front of you. That is simply the sort of the tip of an iceberg that needs to go much broader than that. And I think, yes, there is always space for us to examine how we engage, because the question is not should we engage with the private sector, it's how we can do it in the best way that maximizes the added value that businesses individually and business organizations and employer organizations can bring to the work of the United Nations. And I think we need to sit down and have this case. And I've been thinking about this in these rather turbulent times that we're in. On the one side, it's quite clear that if we're going to design policies and we're going to implement policies which are going to have real impact, and the 2030 Agenda, the Sustainable Development Goals, is the obvious example, where the role of the private sector has been recognized from the outset. That is one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is, we need to make the case for multilateralism at the moment. We're under pressure. And business voices speaking about how multilateralism, helps them in their everyday work, I think is the other side of the coin. So I see it as a sort of a two-way street. We need to look at it. And I think, yes, there is room to be original and to have conversations, particularly, not exclusively, but particularly in these difficult times where, the voices of business and the multilateral system and our complementary efforts come together. So let's work at that.
So thank you for that. But rest assured, we put out a declaration of all the global business groups in New York and throughout the world absolutely supporting multilateralism. Business, private sector employers, we need the UN. We need multilateralism. We need inclusive multilateralism. So count on us on that. But we come up to an interesting point on trust. It's mentioned in numerous documents at the UN. And according to the Edelman Trust Barometer, employers remain the most trusted institutions at 62%. Whereas you compare that to governments, it's 52%. How can we leverage this trust with employers to really assist you as really a good partner in making sure we implement on the ground?
Well, I think you make a great point. Again, the sort of talk of a crisis of trust is commonplace in practically all public discourse at the moment, and that trust deficit, I think, affects practically all public institutions, government being a case in point. I don't think the United Nations is immune from that deficit of trust. I've got my own view about how we should interpret the crisis of trust, if we can call it that, in the UN. My impression is, and I think a lot of the survey work bears this out, people still believe in the principles and the concept of the United Nations. Countries working together to do things that I think everybody supports, be it peace, be it development, be it human rights. I think the deficit of trust or confidence is in our capacity to deliver on those things. It just doesn't work. However noble the intent is, it's not delivering. We're not stopping enough wars. We're not delivering enough development. We're not doing enough to take on environmental and climate challenges. So I think it's the effectiveness of multilateralism which is called into question. And when we've seen, as we so often have, the Security Council unable to come to an agreement on fundamentally important issues, I think that further erodes trust. So yes, we can leverage the good figures that you've quoted for the business community and also for civil society in a broader sense. I think it is by the statements we make, and the business declaration in support of multilateralism is enormously appreciated. But it takes us back to the previous part of our conversation, how we can make business part of the way that we work, associate business visibly with the work that we do, and sort of benefit, therefore, from the higher levels of trust which are there, always accepting that we're aligning our efforts to advance common goals. It's not simply a perception thing, it's a very concrete delivery imperative that we have before us.
Yeah, so again, count on us. And you recall a couple months ago, we brought together a group of CEOs together with you to sort of, look at what does business want from the UN. So it was very clear that the UN is absolutely vital, and you heard that. And, from an IOE perspective, we have 50 million companies that are mainly SMEs in developing countries and often run by women entrepreneurs. So the private sector is here, but one of the key messages that came out from the UN is promoting peace and stability. And people might think we want economic development. Absolutely. But I thought it was interesting that the first one was we count on the UN and bringing everyone together, because we can't create jobs if we have a war and we have all these problems. So both globally and locally, we see that we're getting involved in UN activities. But besides the work of employers at the ILO, and you're so familiar with this as being the previous DG, where do you see the private sector playing a more significant role in the coming years to the UN?
Let me go to the first point you make about the fundamental importance of peace and stability in the world. I mean, it's the founding charter of the United Nations, you know, the very first lines about saving future generations from the scourge of war. But there are a lot of wars and a lot of conflicts in the world. And very clearly, and I don't need to tell you this, you know, business like the rest of us, you know, we want stability, we want predictability. It's good for our lives, it's good for our businesses, it's just simply the way development happens. There is a linkage, of course, between peace and security and development and human rights. They go hand in hand, effectively. But it does seem to me that at a time of multiplying conflicts in the world, the UN really does have to up its game around peace and security. We know it, but it does connect to the other pillars of the UN Charter. In that regard, I mean, we tend to think sitting here, well, how can employers, organizations, and the UN work together in our meeting rooms, in our conversations here? But it's really at the country level where I think that this is going to hit the ground. You know, if national employers organizations, if those small and medium-sized enterprises that you speak of, that you represent, connect with our UN country teams, who are really they're at the front line. They're primarily responsible for delivering impact. That's where I think we need to be aiming our efforts. Of course, we have to work here to prepare the ground, get the pieces in place, but we need to make sure that real ground level interaction and cooperation becomes or is a reality, or where it is a reality, is strengthened. And I think we need to think in those terms as well.
Thank you for that. You brought up a really important point. Over the last few years, along with the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, we have put together a playbook around employers' federations, IOE's members, working with the resident coordinators. One of the things that we found, and especially as we're looking at SDG 8, it is the pillar. Create a job, you get so many people out of poverty. However, the flexible rules and regulations that we need for these SMEs is often missing. And so while we bring the resident coordinators and the federations together, one of the things that we found was, yes, they're speaking more so than in the past, but we really ask the UN to put us up front in your cooperative frameworks, your 5-year strategic plans, your voluntary national reviews. Ask us, because I think where the private sector has a big advantage is innovation, data, and certainly technology. And so that's at the local level. We really want to really move the needle on that and getting our employers' federations to be working closer with the UN.
Look, Shea, that message is well understood and well received. We have to make it work. I'm familiar with the guidelines, a playbook that you've produced with the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, and it sort of links into the work made on our side, on the UN side, where our resident coordinators, our country teams have very clear instructions to reach out to business communities as well as your labor counterparts, to bring them in, to involve them in the work that we do at the national level. So in a sense, you know, we're pulling in the same direction on this. No doubt that, you know, enterprises, you talk about, you know, innovation, data. I think it's even more than that. I think they are very much in touch with the realities on the ground. You know, when it comes to talking about development, let's just put the theories to one side and see what the everyday practice of producing, creating jobs, promoting social protection actually involves. And I think we both agree that the role of employers and of workers working together is fundamentally important to success, to promote SDG 8, and by implication, because I agree with you, everything starts with decent work opportunities. That spreads across, I think, the whole SDG waterfront.
Right.
Really important.
So thank you so much. Good luck on the next few months. You have a few challenges ahead of you. Good luck. Thank you.
Thank you, Shea. Thank you.